Here's what's coming up on episode 86 of the Big Seance podcast. Karl Pfeiffer. Way back in 2009, there was a paranormal reality series called Ghost Hunters Academy, and we were introduced to a young, hip college student in the cast of that show named Karl Pfeiffer.
But something crazy happened. Somebody's like pushed down by a ghost. They weren't rolling for it. They turned the cameras on really quick. They rolled the back half. But for the actual incident, they just sort of like used some other footage that sort of kept it all going together. And it's like, is that unethical? Is that lying? If it's letting people enjoy their ghost photos, that's important. But at the same time, too, coming from that like more scientific end of the spectrum, sometimes it's also important to try to educate the masses, to try to keep things contained a little bit so that like too much excitability doesn't go too far off the rails. You know, everyone goes up to the Stanley, want to talk to Lucy. She's famous. I don't know if Lucy's been there for the last 3 years, you know, which is like sad when everyone's like, oh wait, she's not here. Like what? Like if you started a tour with like, and by the way, like this spirit isn't here anymore, everyone would just be so shocked. You're like, what? One of my most fun family shoots I ever did was like a play on The Walking Dead, where they're like shooting zombies or like standing there looking like they're out of a poster for the TV show. And it was so much fun.
You know, the people who continue to see the faces of Bob and Susie and the orbs, and I just kind of, those are not Susie and Bob.
Yep.
Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the Seance.
Hey, para-nerds. I'm glad you joined me again here in the Big Seance Parlor. In the episode you'll hear today, my conversation with the ever-so-cool Karl Pfeiffer. Then Tim Prossel brings us a brand new spectral edition. This one is called A Ghost Among the Spiritualists. So how perfect is that for the parlor? Then I'll have some listener feedback, and I'll tell you about a show that I was just on, and it's not paranormal, but if you're a techie nerd, or a podcast nerd maybe, you'll get a little behind-the-scenes look at the Big Seance podcast. But first, the main entertainment for your visit today. Karl Pfeiffer, welcome to the parlor. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm super excited about this. I've been following you for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that a lot of people follow you as well who are para-nerds, but people need to catch up with some Karl Pfeiffer, man.
Yeah, I'm always down. I'm always excited. These are just infrequent enough that like it's always a highlight of my week, you know, getting to chat all this stuff. You bet.
That's cool. So what is usually your beverage of choice when you're chilling, you know, in the average seance parlor?
Coffee, probably. But sweetened up coffee so that, you know.
Everything in it?
Yeah, exactly. I'm a guy that like flavors the crap out of it. So
that it's like sugar and a little bit of coffee?
Yep, exactly.
Okay,
just a touch
that's
of coffee.
how I roll. That's what I'm going to pour for myself. So here we go. Way back in 2009, there was a paranormal reality series called Ghost Hunters Academy, which was hosted by Steve and Dave from TAPS. And we were introduced to a young, hip college student in the cast of that show named Karl Pfeiffer, who ended up winning Ghost Hunters Academy because really it was a competition. And then he spent a little bit of time on Ghost Hunters International, which he may tell us about. But what you may not have known is that outside of his role as ghost hunter, Karl is a novelist, an amazingly artistic photographer. We'll talk about that for sure. A videographer, screenwriter, blogger, vlogger, graphic designer, poet, journalist, lecturer, and for several years, he ran the weekend ghost hunts at the Stanley Hotel in the beautiful Estes Park, Colorado. And those don't happen anymore, but he's got plenty of stories, I'm sure, and experiences. So there is plenty to talk about today. So how did you get involved? I know you've said you were on a college paranormal team in college, but did you have any paranormal experiences that brought you into all of this stuff?
Yeah, so my story doesn't have too many fireworks at the beginning of it, the way that some people's do.
Mine doesn't either. That's okay.
Yeah. Well, and I've talked about it with people like John Tenney and different folks like that about how there's those two very different origin stories. There's the people that almost feel literally called to it by the spirits and the experiences they've had. And then they feel there's other ones like myself that have had more of a personal or interest kind of calling to it that, you know, goes back to whether or not it's because I'm like half Scorpio or just whatever. Since I was a kid, I've always been fascinated by that dark and creepy and mysterious. And the ghost interest was always kind of there while growing up. You know, it was aliens for a while. It was ghosts. I had the books and stuff on it going up through middle school and high school. And in high school was when the Ghost Hunters show really started to premiere and then took off. And I got very into that. But, you know, then going through a lot of the process was a lot like other people's stories where finding a team was kind of tricky, finding locations to try my hand at and ghost hunt a little bit. And so right before I submitted my info to the casting people for Ghost Hunters Academy, I had done only a couple of investigations at that point with a local team. That there's a lot of different types of teams out there. And that one was sort of the hodgepodge of people who didn't really know each other. They were still kind of starting off as a team. So we did a couple of the investigations kind of bumbling around a little bit, but I found that there was a lot that could be gleaned and picked up from watching the TV shows. A lot of investigators cautioning against that with good reason. But when you've watched enough, you start to certainly pick up some of those techniques, even if you're missing 90% of the rest of the investigation that wasn't cut for television. So I kind of picked that up, and then things went well with the casting process, and I wound up on Ghost Hunters Academy. Very wet behind the ears, but it was also a very sink or swim situation, kind of a boot camp scenario where we just got thrown to the dogs, learned super fast, and all the goods and bads that came with it to make reality television content and all the drama that was forced out of that. But yeah, so going back from the start there, it was always sort of a search for that experience that would sort of validate, if not my beliefs, my hopes towards there being something beyond this that both fascinated me and intrigued me at the time. And so to date, while I've had certainly a bunch of weird experiences, probably forgotten more minor weird experiences than I remember, I think it's still a process of trying to one up each experience, because you know, it wasn't like on the 15th ghost hunt. It was all fell in front of me. And there's the ghost. It's great. I'm seeing them everywhere. You know, it's a process. It's a process. And I think there's different types of people that it kind of comes for too. I remember Steve, as you mentioned, from Ghost Hunters Academy. I associate a lot with in that sense that he was always super into it, but it didn't seem like it would happen around him very much. And he was always the one guy on the case that didn't happen to him, and he was so bummed that he missed that crazy experience everyone else had. And I feel that way a lot. And I don't know if it's a skepticism or a critical mindset that sort of puts up a barrier or just what, but something about that energy dynamic. It can take a long time. So it's been a process for me.
I've often wondered that about myself, and that's what some people have said. For example, the Ouija board, all of my listeners know that for years I've used the Ouija board and nothing's happened. Mm-hmm. And so I've often wondered if it's a skeptic thing with me, if there's some kind of block for that. You know, I really want something to happen in all areas of the paranormal, but most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah, which is interesting, because when you want it that badly, you'd almost expect that there would be something there. So who knows, if it's a critical block or not, because I always justified it for years. People would be like, well, just open up a little bit more, just stop like nitpicking everything. And I'm always, like, I appreciate that because I think it does open some doors in a lot of ways. But at the same time, there's just that part of the brain, left, right, whichever side, I can't remember, but it's that part that can't be comfortable with like not like you just can't turn it off, that you hear a sound and you think, was like, it can't just jump to like getting excited about that being a ghost, like there's that part of the brain that's always trying to think too critically. Mm-hmm. So who knows, maybe that's part of it, or maybe it's just other circumstances that we don't know about yet.
Well, I had to tell you, you talked about experts cautioning people to not really base their, training in paranormal investigation from the shows. But I do think, and I've cautioned people too, I do think that there are plenty of good things, some basic things, and kind of some structure. Everybody in the world now has the same structure of a team that ghost hunters started out with. But that's kind of what I did. I mean, I read, but I took what was good from the shows and then researched on my own the rest of it. So, and you must have completely played that off. You said you didn't have a ton of experience going into the academy because, man, you looked like a pro. I remember that.
Thanks. It's like there was a lot that you pick up that when you've watched enough episodes, you get kind of the process down that they might only show the clips where stuff is happening. They might jump into an investigation after they've been there for 4 hours already, and you don't see all that buildup. But with enough episodes, you're going to see enough of different pieces of that process. And it might always end with like some sound that may or may not be a ghost, cut to commercial break. But at the same time, like you're going to pick up on sort of like the questions that they're asking, the different topics. And Academy, for me, I think for a lot of us on that show, it was not a very active show in terms of paranormal activity. Like we didn't have a ton of crazy stuff happen in that first season for us. And that's its own kind of training too. When you're stuck in one room for 2.5 hours, cameras are on you, you're sitting in a corner, you ask every possible EVP question that could come to mind. You're recording, you're trying to stir them up. It forces the creativity. So you learn very quickly kind of like how to go about some of that. But at the same time, you pick up a lot from the shows. I think it's more of just that narrow focus of not picking up the wrong pieces or not watching 2 episodes and being like, I know how to ghost hunt, because you got to go out there and experience it for yourself. But there's plenty to be learned. There's nothing wrong with getting a good basis there, but it doesn't make you an expert either.
And so you've hit on it a little bit, but you must have an interesting opinion about, there's criticism of paranormal reality TV that, my pet peeve is staginess. And I don't mean staginess like falsifying evidence, but like the whole, I just walk up to this haunted house for the first time and now I've met, like the scripty part of it. That's always kind of bugged me, but yet I will fall for every show and I love every show and I watch it and I've seen every Ghost Hunters and all that. But you must have some definite opinions with what seems to be hyped up and what's real, and what do you do when nothing happens at a location, and what are your mixed probably thoughts about that?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different angles on it, and it's something I've thought about a lot because I went into the Ghost Hunters Academy experience at that time being like a huge Ghost Hunters like fanboy and being like, they're the ones who do it the best, And I went away from it being totally open to all the other shows and less concerned about like what's real and what's not real. And it wasn't because I was involved with any fakery or involved with, like the staginess that you bring up, like is a part of reality shows. And it could have just been that simple nature of it. But I went away from it just like open to watching everything like it was a mini movie every week and not caring about like if it was real or faked and just enjoying the experience of it. And that was fun. Like it was nice to just enjoy some television. That said, I had kind of an interesting revelation that I'm not sure if I have a hard opinion on it, but I was thinking, and I talked with some people about it, but if you're on an investigation and something happens and the camera isn't rolling for that to happen, which there was one of my favorite episodes of Ghost Hunters, this actually happened. But something crazy happened. Somebody's like pushed down by a ghost. They weren't rolling for it. They turned the cameras on really quick. They rolled the back half. But for the actual incident, they just sort of like used some other footage that sort of kept it all going together. And it's like, is that unethical? Is that lying? And most people would say no, like, it happened, wasn't exactly as they said it, showed it on TV, but it's fine, but how far does that extend at a certain point, when if you weren't rolling or if something happened or if something's been said to happen in the past, like if ghosts are real and if ghosts do all of these things and you have a TV show that's misleading about whether it actually happened on camera, if at all, like at the end of the day, if that's the primary goal is to translate that experience to the viewers and they experience it as being more real because they believe that it's real, like there can be some justification in that. That said, like it comes down to an integrity level. And my integrity is that what I say is going to be legit is legit. And so I think that that's sort of the line that everyone has to walk. But that idea between reality and fiction on television, whether it's ghost shows or anything else, like is an important question because television at the end of the day is about the numbers and about keeping people entertained. And that goes for reality shows, that goes for the news even these days, that it's an important question to ask, to consider those motivations and then to consider what you're actually consuming. The staginess, I think, independent of like the real or fake question, I think the staginess is sort of a reality show sort of staple because they want to set those scenes and have them feel real. And I think reality shows are starting to evolve lately. I'm not sure towards what per se, but with the quality of television getting so much better in a lot of the scripted departments, I think that reality TV shows for the 10 years, 15 years, they were super hot are starting to adjust. And I don't know if that's going to move towards a more documentary style or just what, but the staginess I think has become sort of more of a cliche of the ghost hunting shows that used to be, and the ones that will be coming in the future will be a higher quality and a different feel as the TV gets better.
I think also that at this point, at this stage in paranormal TV, people get that. I think people get that if it's not entertaining enough, they're not going to watch. And so they'll accept enough of that. Because even I will get really annoyed sometimes when things are like blown out of proportion. And I'm like, oh, please, that had to have been really boring and they made it exciting. But then would I sit there and watch it for an hour if it was just them sitting in the dark asking for knocks all night long and nothing happened? So I think people get that at this point in time and are willing to kind of go with a lot of that stuff.
It's really one of the challenges that I think is on the table right now for any paranormal shows is that there's the reality of paranormal investigation, which is that 95% of the time you're just going to be sitting in the dark with nothing happening. That shows like Ghost Hunters used to be really good at that, where they would present that aspect of it and say, we're being honest. Sometimes this is how it goes and you don't find anything. But at a certain point, like everyone loved that. They were like, oh, this is what ghost hunting really is. You don't know what this episode is going to give us. It's exciting. But after a long enough time, presenting that 95% reality isn't exciting anymore. And though it's respectable because that's how it actually goes, and that's being honest, it's not going to keep viewers. So it's sort of this interesting, I think that's why paranormal TV died off to some extent, because it was either going to have to be too good that it was unsustainable, nobody would really trust it anymore, or it would be too boring. And so I think that things got quiet, and now the sort of next wave, those new, not gimmicks, but the new features of every show that's going to be coming out more is going to be a new feature that tries to disregard that question, that tries to make those topics bigger and more than just, are there ghosts happening or are ghosts not happening right now? It's going to be bigger stories, bigger background, bigger other things.
I totally agree. And whatever happens, we will never be able to go back to that very first season and that feel. I've watched some of those episodes in that first season like 5 times, just how natural it was. And it was so very real. And they really showed what was happening and how you do it. And it's so interesting. And we'll never have that again.
Yeah. Or it'll just be in a different way. But yeah. It won't be like it was.
Yeah. So I had seen Ghost Hunters Academy, but a couple years later, I found you during the period of time where I was doing a lot of blogging, and you were a big inspiration for me. You began blogging and creating super cool videos covering what I've heard you say. You've called them ghost hunting basics. And some of my favorites, and I don't know how many you have total, but some of my favorites, and I went back and watched several of them again just recently, lens flares and orbs. And that is still, I can't believe, such a hot topic in the paranormal community.
Yeah, it keeps coming back around.
And provoking, and you did a Ouija episode. You did a cool one called What Kind of Ghost Hunter Are You? And you've even talked, speaking of what we just talked about, moral and ethical issues in paranormal investigation. So what led you to that kind of vlogging thing? That seems like you really enjoyed what you were doing with those vlogs.
It was fun. That was coming at this time, which is weird to look back on now, because when I was doing those vlogs, I look back on the Ghost Hunters experience as feeling like a long time ago and trying to sustain it. And now I look back on those vlogs and I was like, wow, gosh, I was young then. Like, where's the time going? But in the vlogs, I think it was just a lot of that time post show that I kind of took what I'd learned, wasn't having the opportunity to be on TV again, maintaining that. I was working at the Stanley. And by working at the Stanley each week, that job was interesting because it was 5 hours with the members of the public. And we had an hour tour at the beginning, and then we had about 3 hours of ghost hunting and a final hour where we kind of threw them out to do it on their own. And the challenging part of that job was that ghosts or not, like, we had to entertain and educate. And the educational focus each week and watching how these people who had never done ghost hunts most of the time before acted, and what they were curious about, and what they misinterpreted or interpreted from the TV that they'd been watching. And so there was a lot of misconceptions and ideas floating around that made me realize that there was a lot of people out there in the internet world that might have a receptive ear to kind of hearing some of my thoughts on those clarifications. And so I started doing the vlog series to try to keep up with that. I've been kind of a viewer of a lot of the popular vloggers on YouTube, and I have always enjoyed the style. And so for a couple of months there, I was trying to put out as many as I could think of on these different topics that I might, if I was lucky, be able to lend some insight on. So it started to dry up a little bit. It was bad timing because my camera got stolen out of my bag when I was traveling at one point. And in that interim, I sort of realized that I was running out of content to some extent too. And I didn't want to beat a dead horse or necessarily start drawing on topics I didn't know enough about to kind of educate people. But it was a really fun time because I arranged them on my website as almost kind of a syllabus where you can kind of go through these different topical basics and get some perspective on it, and just kind of like clarify the things that I've learned from the hundreds of investigations I've been on at that point, from where I started, and what you might pick up on from TV that is or isn't accurate.
Well, I hope you're comfortable with people still viewing them, because I think they're great. And I've seen that page you talk about, the syllabus, where you have all the videos listed, and I'm going to go ahead and link it in the show notes, and I recommend people check them out. And I've been known to use a few of them I'll be in some group and somebody asks a question and I don't really know how to explain it. I don't usually have the greatest vocabulary in the world, and I don't do very well at explaining techie things. And I'm like, ooh, hold on. I've got a great video. Please hold. And I go and I grab your link, and then I'll throw it in there. So one of my favorites, as I said, is the lens flare and the orbs video. And I would love, and this, I don't know, it might seem kind of awkward in the middle of this interview because I'm loving hearing your stories, but I considered having a whole episode on this and talking to you about this for a whole episode. I don't know how that would work, but I would love to hear from you, your thoughts on lens flare and orbs. And I've approached it very gently on the podcast. You never want to turn people off, but the people who continue to see the faces of Bob and Susie and stuff in the orbs. And I just I'm open to so many things, and I'm open to so much love and light and all this stuff. And I'm just like, those are not Susie and Bob.
Yep.
Give us some education here.
Yeah. Well, it's one of another of the hardest features of the job at the Stanley was because, people are going there and the tour guides encourage everyone to pull out their phones and take pictures. And it's just picture after picture that I'd be shown from people thinking that they captured something. And I think a lot of those guests were very open to being educated, but like politics in a lot of ways, I think people are starting to get really polarized on it, where they don't want to hear that their orb picture isn't, because, you're one of those that throws out all these, fine, whatever, And there's sort of a passive approach that says if that answers your questions, then good, which is a pleasant way to do it, but doesn't get to the heart of things so much. I'm always open. I always see the two sides to a lot of different things, but because of my background in photography now, once you see the explanation for it, it makes it so much harder to swallow these instances that at the end of the day, I fear absolutes. And so, I'll give it 99% of them are dust, but who knows, maybe there's some little ghost manifesting in front of your camera lens.
I am the same way. I'm the same way.
Yeah. And I will, credit and weirdness and open-minded, but there's coincidence too. And who knows when those coincidences aren't, and they're actually meaningful and connections. Once in a while I'll turn on an episode of Ghost Adventures and they're the kings of the random dust particle being something.
It's always, what is it? It's always a ball of light. Is that what they call it?
Yes. Yeah.
A ball of light just totally came out of your forehead or whatever.
Exactly. And they say it's not dust because dust looks like this, and it's swirling dust on the floor, right? And there's so many of those moments. You can see that it's a particle coming into the IR beam, and that's why it disappears or appears. But there's moments when stuff is happening in a sequence and someone feels a tap on their head right when that thing went in there and looks like dust to me. But sometimes that timing, I will say, can be weird. I'm not going to say that that's a ghost, but I'll try to be open-minded enough to be able to give a little shrug of the shoulders and say, yeah, that's weird. But with all my education, it's the flash. And that's the first and foremost thing is when the flash is so close to the camera lens, it lets that light bounce directly out, hits the particles that are very close to the lens, and then bounce right back into it. Where it was far less common back in the older days where the flash was a couple inches above your lens, that's going to be a different angle. That's not going to bounce that dust right back into the lens. And, that's the thing, is that most all of the pictures that I've seen, the flash is on. And for those, that's when I went on the tangent of the lens flares, is because sometimes the flash isn't on, but that's typically because there's a light source in most of the time the frame of the picture. And it just bounces on the inside of the lens, and you usually have a little orby looking dot. And because cell phones lenses are so small, you don't get the normal crazy, artsy lens flare that you get from a big SLR camera. And it's usually going to look like a little dot that's not supposed to be there. But it's always typically, unless there's some weird cropping happening in your camera, it's typically opposite of the center axis of your photo. And that's the easiest way to tell is all right, what's on the opposite side of the photograph? Look at that. There's a lamp, And I get that people get excited, and I get that they don't know what that is in their photograph and they want to capture a ghost, and it seems to answer some questions. But there's a point when the recreatability really just knocks it, the people who smack pillows and take flash photos, and the dust in the air is illuminated, and they filled websites with all the different types of dust particles and colors and what it looks like and bugs.
And personalities.
Like, yeah. And if that's a ghost, like they're pretty darn easy to conjure up by slapping some dusty surface, you know? So I'll always leave that little 1% of open-mindedness, but it's the challenge of this job. And me, you know, you will have a crazy couple of nights once a year that get you so excited and so trusting in what you believe in. And then you get the rest of the year where the more you learn, the more you realize that people can get very easily excitable, and people don't know all the ins and outs of every single mechanical thing that could be related to ghost hunting. And then you start to get that other side of it that just says like, are we just misinterpreting everything? You know, that little doubter in my brain starts going like, was I just misinterpreting everything? Am I just missing something? But that's the skeptic brain. There's the other side of it that I've had good experiences. It's there, but
right.
Orbs is the best one to start to try to kill that.
Well, it's also, is it true that digital photography in general creates, just the fact that it's digital creates a lot of those orbs that we didn't have before digital photography? I've always heard that too, and I didn't know if that was necessarily true.
It's not necessarily digital so much, because the digital factor is just like how the light is read inside of the camera, whether it's on a sensor or whether it's on film. That doesn't make too much of a difference in the orb scenario. But with the advent of digital has come smaller and smaller cameras, which typically means the flash is closer and closer to the lens, especially with like cell phones. So they kind of go hand in hand because it's more about that proximity from the light and the lens. Also with the digital, it can look a little bit weirder. That's also more to do with the smaller lens, that the flare doesn't look the same as it might have used to. But as far as that happening, it's not the digital per se, but the size more so. That said, there's the other side of it that's a very interesting question about capturing actual ghosts and whether or not film, actually just analog versus digital in general, makes a difference in capturing actual ghosts. And that one's almost easier discussed with EVP, because the way that microphones work for tape recording versus digital recording is a completely different process. And so it's honestly like, it's another one of the things that I'll just talk about with John Tenney, you know, for hours at an event or something. But that whole idea of like, why are we getting ghost voices on both recorders? Because it's a completely different process. I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but I can't think of it. It's just like, if you see a ghost on your TV, like, why should you expect to see one on your door? You know, it's a horrible analogy, but like they're different things at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely some very fascinating discussion, whether you're talking about film cameras or whether you're talking about analog recorders. It's magnetics versus these digital sensors, that if you're looking at what is actually causing these paranormal phenomena on these recording devices, the process is completely different. So how do ghosts work if they can do both? You know, or are we just misinterpreting one, or are we misinterpreting both? That's where it gets very techie, but it's really interesting sort of area that needs to be explored right now, while we still have access to some of that analog stuff, because it's starting to die.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the situation. You're in, you know, a Facebook group or somewhere, or on social media of your choice, and someone posts a picture of something that's likely to be pareidolia, and they say, so do you see what I see? And so what do? Do you jump in, or like politics, do you go, ooh, I'm not even going there? Or, because I can't tell you how many times I see that in a week. And it's always accompanies, so do you see what I see? Which instantly means I am not going to accept your answer. I've already decided that is Jesus on that grilled cheese, and you're not going to tell me anything else.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. I am political about it. I just put my head down. Most of the posts that go like super viral, I'm usually curious as a challenge to be like, all right, like, what is this, and like that Mothman one that was going around a couple weeks ago, like it's so clearly like a figure with wings in that, like, do you see two faces or the vase, the optical illusion? That sometimes it's a fun challenge for me to just like click on the picture and be like, okay, yes, brain, I know that looks like a form, but like what else could it be?
It's
like
a palm tree. I kept
shapes.
seeing palm tree.
Yep. And that's what a lot of people said. And I love it too, because with my Photoshop background, it's like, oh, here's the side-by-side pictures. And I look close and I'm like, clearly been Photoshopped out. You know what I mean? Like it's fun to look at that stuff. But as far as engaging in the discussion, it's just like jumping into a political discussion.
Exactly. It is.
And on the viral ones, there's already people that have put out a million explanations, and it's just such a spectrum. There's the people that are like, no, it's not a ghost, you're all stupid. And then there's the ones that are like, it's a palm tree. And then there's the ones I looked really closely, and there's like, you can tell because of the leaves, and they're giving this thought out thing. And then there's other people that are like, oh my God, tag so-and-so, did you see this? And it's usually all been said, or people are sharing it with me, and it's been shared like 4 times to me already. And I'm like,
right.
It's just like, it's a long explanation. Again, it's politics. It's a long explanation that you don't want to type over and over again, and then get into some Facebook discussion that's nitpicking the little details. It's like, well, what about this? Okay, well, now I have to teach you about this concept. It's just,
right.
It's easier to just sort of be like, I'm going to avoid this one.
And with all this being said, I love all of my listeners, and everybody has different opinions. And some of you have sent me some of those pictures, and I just go, neat.
Well, the thing I appreciate is the enthusiasm,
Right,
it's just
right.
Like, there's a million things to knock about anything, but I have to appreciate the enthusiasm towards the creepy and the unexplained, because at the end of the day, that's the exact same source that I'm coming from. I've just chosen to like get involved in the nitpicky mechanics of how this or that isn't a ghost. But like, I still want to see some spooky shit on Facebook, like I dig it. Yeah, I'm not sharing it saying it's a ghost, but like I enjoy the possibility and the idea of it. What if that is like some creepy Mothman standing there? Like it's fun. So that's my other side of it too. Is like I appreciate the excitement.
Yeah, I used to, even just a few years ago, like 2.5 years ago, I used to be really serious and uptight about this stuff, and I used to be defensive about things and try to correct people, and felt it was my job to go and correct people if I thought that they just were not educated about some paranormal topic or whatever. And there came a day where I was like, I can't do this, and I'm just going to enjoy this. And so I've had to kind of rewire my brain to do just what you said. I enjoy it. I come from the same place. And so it's helped me just kind of listen to people. And now I'm very OCD too. So like when I'm doing an experiment, I all of a sudden have 16 pages of documentation and numbers, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, why? Where did that get me? Drop it, shut up, and just enjoy your experiment. And maybe it was, and maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, it's a big it's like a cultural shift right now in a lot of ways, because regarding the paranormal, I think part of it is that the paranormal was really polarized into 2 camps for about 10 years. And that was the TAPS camp and the Ghost Adventures camp. Not even including the like classically trained researcher camp and the skeptic camp that are like also involved in there. But in terms of the popular perspective on the paranormal, it was very like polarized. And now that those shows have sort of dissolved in their own ways, and new shows have cropped up and people have crossed over, like Paranormal Lockdown's got a Ghost Adventures alum and a Paranormal State alum, and like it's crossing over now. And I think that's sort of forced people's minds to open up, that like the camp mindset isn't going so strong anymore. They're like, oh, everyone's actually kind of friends, and we can do new, fresh things, and we don't have to necessarily hold by this framework, but that's a good idea that they have, and that's a good idea that they have. And so I think people are becoming more open-minded, which I think makes them less stubborn about certain beliefs. And I think with that needs to also come that change in perspective about like why we're involved in this and what our roles are, which is one of the vlogs you referenced that I did it's a lecture topic that I've been going around about. It's going to have a big chapter in a book if I ever start writing again. But it's that whole idea of just like, take your background, take why you love the paranormal and try to put them together and then own that, And if it's like you've got a PhD in physics and you enjoy ghosts, like go do real science on ghosts in your free time if you can. If you're just an enthusiast who's seen a couple of ghost shows, cool. Go out and have some experiences. I've always put forth the analogy of the bird watchers. Like there's no tension between bird watchers and like ornithologists. Like everyone gets along. And ghost people can too. We just have to narrow that down so that people don't watch a TV show, go off to some graveyard and say that they're doing science. We just have to make sure terms are a little bit more compartmentalized. But that's the same thing. It's like you say that you got like 16 pages of experiment notes, which is awesome. Unless you realize you're like, I was just here to see a ghost tonight. I was just trying to relax and have some fun. And that's the sort of thing, is there's no wrong way to do it as long as you kind of keep that all in perspective. So if it's letting people enjoy their ghost photos, that's important. But at the same time too, coming from that like more scientific end of the spectrum, sometimes it's also important to try to educate the masses, to try to keep things contained a little bit so that like too much excitability doesn't go too far off the rails. But yeah, I think people are starting to realize some of those different things, break them down, and appreciate just being enthusiasts again.
So you worked at the Stanley Hotel for several years, and I totally missed you. I was at the Stanley with my family. We stayed 3 nights there. I think it was a couple years before you. What year did you start working there?
I started officially working there in like January of 2011, and I was just sort of haunting the place for a couple months before then.
I think we were there in like 2009, so I missed you by a couple of years, but I so very much enjoyed that experience. And even if you take out because it was fairly quiet for us, the paranormal experiences we had, not that we were like really truly investigating or anything, but just being there, like my favorite thing to do. Like there were 2 nights in a row, like in the middle of the night, I just got up, went down, sat by the crackling fire.
Oh yeah.
And that huge entrance there by yourself, just imagining the history. And that was enough for me, but I'm sure you have lots of experiences. Tell us about some of the loaded question, I'm sure. Tell us about some of the coolest experiences you've had over the years at the Stanley.
Yeah. I mean, one of the hardest parts about them, like, first of all, I agree with you. I think one of the coolest features of the Stanley is the way that the history is so closely tied to that place, that it feels like it's so thin between the now and the past, that you can sit in that lobby and try to see it the way it was, that you pass those old historical photos on the wall and you try to visualize like you just went back in time. Who knows if that has an effect on the spirits there, even the fact that so many people are in that mindset, is it thinner? Can we see into the past? Is that why it's haunted? Who knows? But yeah, one of the hardest parts about having been up there for 5.5 years, until that ended in last March, about a year ago, was like I did about 250 investigations on the property right by the time it was all said and done. And I always joke that I've probably forgotten more like small weird things than like I remember, because there's a point when it's just happening so much that you might have a mild night that you kind of forget about. So it's fun to read some of my old notes or watch some of my old blogs. And, oh my God, I forgot about that experience. That one was weird. So some of my weirder ones, I mean, I always talk about one of the earliest ones right before I got up there officially. I was investigating with Connor, who's a close friend now and part of the team on the later side of things. And then the original investigator, Callie. And we were there late one night. It was a slow night. It was pretty quiet. And my joke about this story is that it was one of my favorite stories was also my weakest moment as a ghost hunter, because it was the only time I dozed off on an investigation. Like, what an amateur, falling asleep on a ghost hunt. But it was really weird because it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. We were in one of the guest rooms, which was the first time I investigated in one of the guest rooms. I hit that hypnagogic state, in my mind, which is that state of being half awake, half asleep, as you're falling asleep, and started to dream for about 10 or 15 seconds. And this dream was like the most vivid dream I've ever had in my life. It was so crystal clear in my mind's eye. And I saw this face looking at me, and it was a man's face crossed with like a pig's face, and bald head, wispy little hair sticking out, like goblin ears kind of coming off the sides. But instead of eyes, there was only these two eye sockets looking at me. And definitely creepy. But in that moment, in that sort of dream moment, didn't faze me at all. Until, like I said, about 10 minutes in, I was like, or 10 seconds in, I was like, wait, that's a little bit weird. And that was enough to just like snap whatever moment that was right out. And I woke up. If that was where it stopped, I would have written it off as a random vivid dream, just dozing and trying to stay awake like that. But the validation element is so important to me, and the like semi-scientific sort of thinking that I try to do, because that starts to lend more credence towards the objectivity of an experience actually happening, right? It kind of gets away from whatever the stupid in my brain or the hallucination or the imagination, whatever is happening, it starts to form something. And when I told Callie about it right then, she said, that's super creepy, because the resident psychic, Madame Vera at the hotel, who's got a little office there in the basement of the main building, she described that exact same thing in that exact same room about a year before that. And I was like,
shut up.
Now you're creeping me out a lot more, like that was nothing before. And now that's something else. Vera described it as an elemental spirit, right? So elementals, much more European, Irish type classification of the phenomena, part of like the fairy kingdom over there. A lot of dovetailing with UFOs and aliens, which is a whole different tangent. I'll let Jacques Vallée speak for that one for me. But what was weird then was one of my favorite episodes of Ghost Hunters was the Irish Elemental episode when they go to Ireland. And that was the first episode that Barry Fitzgerald was on. And he, obviously incredibly knowledgeable in that sort of thing, he introduced this like elemental spirit to the team. And when I was doing some research on it about a month later, I found the journal entries from the owner's wife who had first experienced this elemental presence. And she described it in writing as being half man, half animal, with eyes so black they looked like or were only eye sockets. And I was like, that's freaking weird, Like a month later, not knowing any of that stuff, to have that just pop into my head and then have all these corroborating factors after the fact that like give it a lot of meaning and consistency between these stories. I don't know what I saw. It was not a normal paranormal experience. Are they ever, I suppose? But like, it's not like I watched a ghost walk through the room. It was in that high strangeness category of like, just bizarre, and that was sort of, I think, my welcome. And then a couple of weeks later, I was there on staff, leading the Ghost Hunts officially. So very strange. Very strange. But one of my favorite stories to go back to because of how strange it was.
Yeah. I stayed in room 412 when I was there 3 nights. And I don't know if this was a good thing or not, but like a dummy, I didn't think to do any research on specific rooms or whatever. So my family, actually, my whole family, we had rooms 408, 410, and 412. My partner and I are in 412. And the first night, we're out in the hall. My partner's actually, he thinks we're nerds. So he's like, whatever, going to sleep, have fun. So we're out in the hall, and we hear about all of the children's spirits supposedly and leaving the trinkets and the toys. And, we have some of our nerdy equipment out there and we're enjoying ourselves, not taking anything too seriously. And then I decided to pull out my phone and pull up YouTube and find all of the videos of investigations of my room. And so I have to go, and of course now it's like 1:00 in the morning while I'm sitting there with everybody and we're like, ha ha ha, it's your room, ha ha ha. And I'm like, I have to go and creep in this room now where someone's already sleeping and not wake them up, and it's dark, and I've never really been in this room in the dark. And now, of course, I've instantly decided that there are demons in this room,
Yep.
And it was just this cute little peaceful room before. And I'm convinced now that it was just my mind really trying to work things up for me. But I tossed and turned in that bed for half the night. Just, the sounds that were, and the feelings and the energy, I almost had to just get up and get out of the room and just sit in the hall and sleep in a chair all night long because it was so crazy. And then, the rest of the nights, nothing. Peaceful, slept like a baby. Do you have any experiences from 412? Because apparently several people have had quite some experiences.
Yeah. 412, I'm not sure if 412.
412 is the one on the end of the hall that has the cool door, the exit that has the kind of the arch at the top.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever been in 412.
412 is the one where supposedly a woman came in and that was the vibrating bed, where the bed lifted and vibrated and she went to the hospital or something.
That's right. That was one of the weird factors about that job was like going back to the old Ghost Hunters episodes and stuff that they did there. And then the stories that were taking hold when I got there, like that story, I still remember actually, like largely fell off the radar totally when I started up there. And granted, I mean, Ghost Hunters was there about 2004. I was there in 2010. So definitely some time to pass, but it was really interesting to watch how those stories sort of like came and went, that was one of the ones that made the episode. And when I got there, like no one was talking about that anymore. It's interesting to watch how those things are naturally sort of like change over time and also how those things are directed over time.
Side effect of paranormal TV.
Yeah. If the bed's vibrating and if the woman's possessed and she has to go to the hospital, like interesting to see that story fall out of being told, because that's not a very like nice story for a nice hotel, right? So in a lot of ways you get those changes that make sense, but it's also interesting for the 5.5 years I was there to watch those stories change on their own and watch the spirits come and go on their own too, over time, fitting with the Stephen King tie-ins. It's interesting to just watch how those stories develop. It's not set in stone. There's not 3 ghosts and that's it. And that's all there'll ever be at the hotel. And you'll get them each time. Everyone goes up to the Stanley, want to talk to Lucy. She's famous. I don't know if Lucy's been there for the last 3 years, which is like sad when everyone's like, oh wait, she's not here. Like what? Like if you started a tour with like, and by the way, like this spirit isn't here anymore, everyone would just be so shocked. They're like, what? But then you think about it for more than a couple seconds and you're like, wow, that actually makes sense. Like it's not necessarily permanent. It's part of what we're learning about these things. So a ghost story in an idea sense, a ghost story stays the same, but in a more practical sense, it's as dynamic and changing as who lives in your house, and life happens. So anyways, point being 412, I'm not sure if I've ever been in that room. So interesting though. With that sort of background, I can understand why you might have had a little bit of trouble trying to fall asleep that night.
I did. It was really rough. And then I guess after that night, I realized I just kind of created a crazy night for myself. And then after that, it was fine. Snored away for the next 2 nights with no problem. Well, I have some questions from some peeps in the Big Seance Parlor. Jesse, who is the owner, he's the owner of his very own haunted property, the Belvoir Winery.
I love Belvoir and Jesse.
Yes. And I love Belvoir. I'd love to go back again. Jesse says, ask him about the rash of ghost photos, in quotes, from the Stanley we've seen lately that appear to not be quite as ghostly as you'd first think, and how that can hurt or help the reputation of a haunted location in general. And we may have kind of touched on that topic a little bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And a couple of friends asked me about the question in a similar way months ago, because, well, so when the Stanley ended the paranormal investigations last like March or April or so, we posted about it and all this drama blew up and blah, blah, blah. But about a week later, like one of these ghost photos from the Stanley like went viral. And a lot of people were like, that's weird timing. Do you think there's something there? And And honestly, with that one, I think it was just weird luck because the Stanley's iconic. Like, you can never really forecast the virality of any one thing. But I think that with that right context, the viral nature of a photo, having that Stanley attachment to it is definitely fodder for the fire and making it spread. So if you get something that looks just ghostly enough to spread on the internet, the Stanley will help it. That said, knowing what I know about just like the owner's perspective on ghosts there and the owner's like motivations for distancing himself from the ghosts, I mean, it's fun from a conspiracy theory standpoint to think about, that like the Stanley just got all this bad rap about trying to distance itself from the ghosts. They're saying, no, we're not. We're just trying to make some changes around here, blah, blah, blah. And then the ghost photo comes out. Like, who knows if that's like, no, it's cool. Like, we're still haunted. We're just changing things quietly. So maybe from that perspective, I love a good conspiracy theory that makes sense. So who knows? But I also think there's just some viral traction there. But the hardest thing with those photos for me is just having been up there for so long. And I've watched people take photos for ghosts on the tours. And there's so many people around that building. And whether it's a person passing by a window, or if it's, shooting something as you're walking with your group, people take a bunch of photos. And then at the next spot where the group stops and slows down, they start looking at them again. And the review time, I think in a lot of people's memories, like I took the photo and then I checked it. But the practical time between the two, even if it's just 10 seconds, could be enough for a person to be gone, And by the time you look at your phone and realize what's there and zoom in on it and say, what the heck was that? It's not there anymore, but that doesn't mean it's a ghost. People saying this didn't look like anyone on our tour, but there's two tours in the same building all the time, and if it's a little girl or something, who knows who's like getting a little bit squirrely or away from their group and then goes back. So
people are always so confident. Oh, I know that there was no one there.
Yes. And that's the hardest thing, because that is one of the most pervasive explanations for the ghost photos is the confidence. But it's also one of the most common mistakes is just mistakes in observation. But that's the hardest thing to point out to people, because you're like saying like your observational skills are not as good as you think they are. Like nobody wants to hear that, like I wouldn't want to hear that. I get it. But when you observe people in those scenarios, like, I mean, what do they say in the law? Like eyewitness testimony is the worst kind of testimony, because memory is so fallible and easily manipulated. So that said, I have to take them all with a grain of salt. I've seen one or two cool ones since I was done at the Stanley, because I keep in touch with people up there. And there's been some that I look at and I say, I think that's got to just be a guest with the group. And people will tell me, like, here's the scenario. Like, there's really no way that could have been. And I can't get too excited about something if I wasn't there, because at the end of the day, I can't know. It's not scientific and I wasn't there. Therefore, I can't know. But I can trust someone if I know them, and then that can make it pretty impressive, So there's been some interesting stuff, but a lot of the viral things, just like what we talked about earlier, it's so tough. It's so tough.
It reminds me of like the time we stayed there. That time period, I was doing a lot of EVP experimenting. And the first thing that you notice when you stay at the Stanley, at least on the 4th floor, because that's all I know, is the creaks and the endless traffic of paranormal nerds walking through the Stanley at all times of the night. And it's like how people that come away with confident EVP too, it's like, how do you know there's like 42 people just walking around creaking and talking and shutting doors? And it's like, well, we recorded this door shut and we know there wasn't anyone outside. And I'm like, you were sleeping.
It has to be so controlled. Yep. And so many people. Yeah. And a lot of it's been put in that experience, like you kind of got to do it a bunch of times before you're like, wow, yeah, this is a noisy hotel or whatever explanation, But I mean, it's an active hotel. One of my favorite times up there, they shut down the main building because they were refinishing the lobby floor. And so no one could check in at the front desk. So they didn't take guests in that building. Well, Connor and myself and the security guard at the time, went into the building and did some ghost hunting with the building, completely devoid of any other people than us.
That was a cool video.
Yeah. That was one of the old vlogs. It was before even the web series stuff we did. It was like a precursor to that. There was, at one point we heard footsteps on the floor down below us, and we went to check it out. And there was people in the building. They came in through one of the open back doors. They just walked right in. And so even when the building is like completely empty except for yourself, there's still people in that building. Like it's a popular place.
Oh, that would have annoyed me so much.
It happened. We understood the door was open, but and the rest of the night was fine. But it just sort of adds to that idea. It's like the Stanley is like never devoid of
never empty.
Yep. Ghostly or otherwise.
So kind of along the same lines, Amber wants to know what was the most compelling spirit-involved picture that you've ever taken?
It's a good question, and I think my answer is interesting only in the sense that I don't think I've ever taken a picture of anything that I found compelling to be a spirit. The two sides to that are, one, like knowing what I know about photography, I try to avoid a lot of those pitfalls. And it's really hard to do decent photography on a ghost hunt for spirits because I try not to use a flash. And long exposure photography is very difficult to capture spirits because even if it's a shadow, if your exposure is for too long, the shadow could move across the wall, but it'll never show up in your photo. If it was producing light, like a genuine orb, then that would show up in your photo, and that would be pretty cool. But trying to keep the conditions, I like this more scientific mindset and influence of trying to keep the environment relatively consistent and not trying to contaminate with your own things. So like infrared light or light at all, like let's just keep it normal. And it's very hard to photograph in those situations if you're essentially in pitch darkness or trying to take fast photos. So I got to a point where I wasn't really doing too many photos in my last couple of years up there. So I don't have a huge bank to draw upon that could have had ghost photos or could have been a huge bank of no photos, but I haven't captured anything. That said, I've got some experiment ideas that I'm very excited to do that unfortunately I couldn't do after all the Stanley drama went down, but they're still in development, waiting for sort of the right time to do it, that I don't want to share just yet, but it's sort of a professional photographer twist on things that I was like, that's an interesting idea that I haven't seen before and could yield some results. So it's not that I don't think ghosts can be photographed. They might not, but it's more of that the conditions are very tricky in order to try to make that work.
So one of our favorite weirdo friends, Greg Newkirk.
Yeah,
what up? He said he wants to know how you and the Stanley gang decided to start doing your crazy awesome ghost box experiment. Where did the inspiration for that come from? And first of all, what's the crazy awesome ghost box experiment?
Yeah, so it's a good question on both counts. So a little background is September 2015 or so, Michelle Tate from Ghost Hunters and Ghost Hunters Academy Season 2 joined us at the Stanley Hotel to lead the weekend investigation. So it was myself, her, and Connor. And we started at the time, the full backstory is that I posted a photo of Michelle to our Paranormal team's Facebook page. And it got some good response. Everyone was excited about it. And I thought, why don't I use this Facebook page more often? Like, we don't really post to it very much. And so then I thought, well, why just post to it? Those are going to be really long text posts. Like, let's do some videos. So we did some vlogs about it. And then this web project that I'm a part of called The Dark Zone, that sort of began around that time. And we decided we would grow these short little vlogs into like webisodes, short episodes about our investigations. And so from about January 2016 until the Stanley canned us in March or April, we were shooting all of these web series episodes. And just something about the combination of people and ideas and shooting content got us thinking kind of creatively. And we wound up doing this experiment with the Spirit Box, the SB7, that Greg was asking about, where we plug in the listener to the Spirit Box and they put on headphones and a blindfold. And they crank it up as loud as they can so that they cannot hear any of the questions or anything that's happening in the room around them. And if they hear some word or sentence or phrase or whatever come through the Spirit Box, they just say it aloud. And we ask questions just like it's a normal EVP session. And we were curious to see how many of these responses would align with our questions. and expecting a couple of interesting moments, like any spirit box session where like, okay, cool, you might have gotten like 2 words that were like, oh, that's kind of crazy. Turns out we were getting just mind-bending interactions, like felt like full conversations now and again. That totally surprised us. So it's an experiment that we're working on different variations for, that we did a bunch in that web series. It sort of came to define that short web series as we progressed in that experiment, doing different distances, having 2 people plugged into it, recording it, seeing what we could get. And it was actually featured Amy Bruni and Adam
I was just
Berry,
going to ask about that. I was like, did they totally steal that from you?
Yes, in the nicest
That's
way.
awesome.
But yeah, they picked that one up from us. So you've seen that on Kindred Spirits. It started on Spirits of the Stanley, and just cool. You know, I love seeing other people do different varieties of it.
There's no way that you can watch that technique and not get goosebumps.
I like it.
And not get goosebumps when you see some kind of correlation there. It is such a cool thing to see.
Yeah, and you and the listeners should definitely go look up the Spirits of the Stanley web series, because, like, I don't know, I haven't talked enough with Amy yet about like how long they did their sessions for on Kindred, because I know that, I mean, it's TV. You got 40 minutes of an episode. You got to cut down a lot. So I'm curious how long they did it for, because it's tough to listen to that. Right. We were doing it enough that we would run, like Connor, we get on there for about 45 minutes at a time listening to the Spirit Box, which, you know, is enough to like scramble your brain, I think, after a while. So I don't know if they did it for little like 5-minute bursts, or if they did like a good long 30-minute session and just couldn't put all those clips into the show. But yeah, they got like 2 or 3 really compelling responses the 2 times they did it. We had back and forth conversations for like 3 or 4 minutes at a time, once or twice. Like, it wasn't super common, but we got some crazy stuff too. So I highly encourage checking it out. But I love seeing other people do it too, because we might not all be scientists, but we're all like, if we want to be scientific, then you want like peer review. You want other people to try it and be like, well, we got this result, or like, we didn't, or did you think of this though? Because this happened when we did it. And then we can try to make it better and try to learn stuff from it. So like it in its own way, like, it's super cool to like see that spread out even further than our web series got, to have other people trying it and getting results.
It's also time for some new techniques. So
exactly,
that's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. So to answer Greg's question, I wish I had a better answer, because I don't know where that idea originated for sure, in the sense that I know there was like a conversation or something at some point years ago where that was sort of like floated as like, oh, that'd be interesting. Like, what if we listened on headphones or something? Probably it was between like me and the old investigator at the Hotel Cali, but I don't have a specific recollection of that memory. So yeah, it could have been Cali's idea, might have been mine, could have just come up naturally, or it could have come up somewhere totally different that I've forgotten. Then between actually conceiving it years ago and actually doing it, I think it was just on a whim. We were just hanging out one night shooting the webisode, but we did it in the balcony, in the hallway, outside Lucy's room, in Lucy's room, on the stage, basically all over that building. But yeah, so cool kind of twist on things that really excited us and opened the door into a bunch of other experiment ideas that we're excited to try as well.
Well, I have to tell you, I wanted to devote way more time to your amazing photography, but I do want to bring it up as a wannabe photographer who's learning and does a lot of cemetery photography. I see your work and I'm just so blown away by how, I mean, straight up Hollywood, some of it looks.
Thanks.
And what training, like what formal training have you had, or are you just kind of learning as you go? Because it's amazing. Tell us about your photography and your inspiration for that.
Yeah, good question.
I just asked you like 4 questions. I apologize.
No, it's all good. Thanks for your kind words. I haven't had any formal training in photography. The longer story is that I was always good at drawing and stuff back in the day as a kid, and took that in a fine art direction up until about high school when I burned out on it. But a lot of that was burnout because I was such a perfectionist. And I think a lot of artists like hit that like photorealistic type stage where they want it to be like photograph quality. And mine was just never quite where I was happy with it. But I had the background in art, and I did video in high school as well. And then both of those things sort of like got put on the back burner for writing for years. And then it was when the camera earlier that I was shooting the vlogs on that I mentioned got stolen, that I upgraded my kind of cheap SLR to a little bit better quality, because I'd bought that original one for traveling for GHI, which lasted for all of 2 weeks. So it was just kind of fun to like learn how the camera worked. But when I upgraded the camera, I got really serious about video and photography both. And at the time, trying to like really make creative endeavors work out for me post college, which is kind of a perpetual uphill climb. I had, I think, more time than the normal like 9-to-5 type job permits at the time, and all the sacrifices that came with that. But I had a lot of time to just like live on YouTube and just like find all my favorite photographers and watch the tutorials and go through thousands and thousands of photos on the photo websites and find, pick out my favorites and then study them and try to figure out how they did them. And then just start trying to do it myself. And it's been a pretty cool thing because the SLR revolution that's happened lately, the digital one, has put so many of these pro grade cameras into consumer hands. A lot of photographers realize that they could make more money off of teaching people how to use this stuff. So tutorials are a dime a dozen, like they're all over. So as long as you kind of know what is striking you about the photo and you want to learn how to recreate that, you just have to have the right keywords to go learn about it. So I spent a couple of years just like diving super deep into the photography stuff, learning about Photoshop and all of the ins and outs of Photoshop and masking and being able to make these like crazy supernatural things happen that I couldn't photograph. And then teaching myself about lighting and how good lighting can make a photograph look like 10 times better quality, and how to combine all those things and then color and just sort of put it all together into this artistic pursuit. And then things got a little bumpy in the last year because I tried to take like the entirety of that passion and orient it towards career work and doing like, portraits and commissions and promos and stuff like that, which I've done a lot of cool stuff regarding, but being in the middle of like nowhere, Colorado to some extent, and having so many like amateur photographers out there, it's tricky to get the work to really start coming in the door for it. So it's been a little slow, kind of hit and miss, a little burnout.
So are you still interested in taking clients then for that type of thing?
Yeah. And I try to bend everything a little bit towards that like epic / supernatural direction of making it a little bit more fun. So like one of my most fun family shoots I ever did was like a play on The Walking Dead, where they're like shooting zombies or like standing there looking like they're out of a poster for the TV show. And it was so much fun. And that's the sort of like little creative twist that like I'm trying to move towards while also like supporting myself. Like I'll do a lot of the normal photography, family photo type stuff, but the direction is to try to find more of that niche market towards the creepier side, but also fun and pretty and cool at the end of the day. So it's been a kind of a cool journey of just diving headfirst into this passion that I didn't know I had until 4 years ago, so it's been neat.
Well, I'm telling you, if you're in Colorado and looking for some cool, hip shots, you should check them out. If I was in Colorado and not super landlocked in Missouri, I would need some headshots for a 38-year-old fat man. So I need to find somebody who could make me look hip and cool enough in a Karl Pfeiffer kind of way. So I need to find somebody to do that.
It's always the trick, finding people, but there's people they'd hook you up, make you look epic, look like you just like walked out of a TV show.
Karl, tell us if there's anything we need to be doing to follow you, if there's anything you've got coming up soon, website, where you think people should go to get more Karl Pfeiffer in their life. Tell us where we need to go.
Totally. So I think kind of the basics are my website is kind of the linchpin of everything that I do digitally on the internet. So that's karlpfeiffer.com. So it's Karl, and then Pfeiffer is Pfeiffer, SpeakPipe.com. That has links to my Facebook page, my Twitter, all that sort of stuff. Twitter is just at Karl Pfeiffer as well. So it's all pretty much the same across the board. You can find all my photo work on there, all my ghost hunting work, video stuff, and writing with my books and all that. And also, as far as more of the ghost-related media that I've been doing lately, the new Dark Zone project that I mentioned as being the impetus for the Spirits of the Stanley web series that we created, where we launched that Spirit Box experiment. Dark Zone did launch in October, and we've aired all of our Spirits of the Stanley episodes. So if you go to thedarkzone.tv, you can sign up for a free membership and watch the content there. Spirits of the Stanley's up. Patrick Doyle from Ghost Mine has a new web series coming there. Susan Slaughter from International and Academy has got a new web series coming out soon. So that's going to be a pretty cool website to keep watching on. And a lot of my photos are featured on said website for all the cast members. So KarlPfeiffer.com, thedarkzone.tv, and then look me up on Twitter. That's where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, the listeners should know they should really appreciate your time as well, because I stole about 30 minutes more than what Karl was probably willing to give me the beginning. So
I'm happy to. Steal me again.
You rock. I really appreciate it. So I hope they're enjoying a longer episode than typical. But Karl, you rock. Thanks for joining us in the Big Seance Parlor.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
You're listening to the Big Seance Podcast with Patrick Keller. Look for us on iTunes and be sure to check out bigseance.com for more discussion.
Welcome to Spectral Edition. I'm Tim Prossel. The dates of the Spectral Edition project that I'm working on are 1865, the end of the Civil War, and 1918, which is the end of World War I. Those dates roughly mark an upsurge in interest in spiritualism, too. And you would expect to see a fair amount of crossover between the spiritualist movement and these ghost reports, but I really don't find it. The spiritualists do show up every now and again, but it's pretty rare. Here's an article where it's very prominent. Spiritualists play a very significant role in this article. The report was published in the Los Angeles Herald on November 26th of 1905. The headline is, Spooks of Slain Lovers. Spiritualists Visit Haunted House and Commune with the Dead. Special to the Herald, Kansas City, November 25th. A band of believers from the First Spiritualist Church visited a haunted house at the northeast corner of Robert Street and Indiana Avenue last night, got into communication with, and in the end exorcised the spirits of a murdered girl and her lover, who, the tenants vow, have been at hijinks in the house for the last month. 30 or 40 residents of the neighborhood were present at the seance, which was conducted by Mrs. Edward Connolly, a professional medium. Until Monday, the house had been occupied by George J. Martin. Martin and a sub-renter, E.L. Kramer, vacated the building because too many weird noises echoed through it in the still watches of the night. "I'm a Missourian, went through the Civil War, and am not afraid of any noise," explained Martin last night, "but there have been things going on in this house that are too deep for me, and I got out because I grew tired of trying to find the causes of them. Only last week, Kramer and I heard 5 distinct pistol shots in the hall, not 10 feet from where we sat. About a month ago, we were awakened by the shrieks and the wail of a woman. The noise came from upstairs, but we couldn't find the woman. Why, we've laid awake night after night hearing things roll down the stairs, the rattling of a coal shuttle, the fall of a stovepipe, and never once have we found cause for the noises or evidences of disturbance." Mr. Martin called upon the spiritualists of the city to help him solve the mystery. They visited the place Sunday and again last night. This, briefly, is the result of the seance as given by the spiritualists. The house is haunted by the spirits of a young Russian Jewess named Lena Bernheim and her lover, Andrew Kogliaski, both of whom were murdered 30 years ago over a dispute about money. The noises which Martin heard are the reproduction of sounds that occurred on the night of the double murder. The seance which resulted in the revelation was a weird affair. The spiritualists, 12 in all, stood about in a circle in one of the ground floor rooms of the abandoned house, while the medium, with sundry mutterings and twitches, conversed in baby talk with the troubled souls that haunt the place. As the communication between this and the spirit world became closer for the medium, others of the faith were seized with convulsions. Not a terribly flattering picture of spiritualists, I don't think. And maybe that was a sign of the times. I'm Tim Prossel, and you've been listening to Spectral Edition. I have close to 300 of these articles, and I post one each Wednesday on my website, which is called The Merry Ghost Hunter, Merry. I also have previously released audio versions of Spectral Edition there. I hope you stop by sometime.
Thanks for joining us for the Big Seance podcast. We'd better get back to the table while there's still some candlelight left.
I want to give another shout out to Tim Prossel. He works really hard to put these segments together for everyone, and they really do add a lot to the podcast, which I'm sure you would all agree. So thank you, Tim. Just this week, I was on an episode of the Podcast Engineering Show with Chris Curran. It may not interest everyone, but if you've ever wanted a peek behind the curtain of the tech and how I produce everything here at the Big Seance, you might find it interesting. It's also probably important to point out that Chris Curran is also the host of the podcast called The Mystic Show, which I know for many of you, that's right up your alley. So I'll add that link to the show notes at bigseance.com. And thank you, Chris, for having me on your show. All right, so here's some new listener feedback. iTunes reviews. Irish Girl says, bravo! I was looking for a new fix since Darkness Radio was canceled, but Beyond the Darkness is wonderful, by the way, and found this. I just started, but I'm binge listening and absolutely love it so far. Well, I'm honored to have you, Irish Girl, and thank you for the review. Yeah, they switched some things up a little bit in the world of Darkness Radio just recently. So now they have a podcast called Beyond the Darkness. So if you've wondered where they've disappeared to, that's where you should look. You can find Dave over there. I've listened to many of their episodes since they made the switch, and I think it's going well. I love the show. Here's a review from our paranerd friend, Jeffrey Peck. Love this podcast. Thank you, Patrick, for bringing such a fun spin on everything paranormal. Your personal and amazing technical style are so warm and welcoming for everybody of all ages and experience. I love your approach to your interviews and the fun and laughter you bring out in people. I highly recommend this podcast to all who are even remotely interested in all things paranormal. Come join our paranerd community. I think I may just need to hire Jeffrey to write ads for the Big Seance. You rock, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. I heard from Slade Roberson last week, and it had been a while since I've talked to him. If you haven't checked out Slade's blog, Shift Your Spirits, you might enjoy that. I got an email from Crystal Hope Reed, who is a pet psychic, by the way, and she had a really good guest suggestion, and hopefully I'll have more to tell you on that in the future. And lastly, I want to send a big shout out to Damon, who dropped what he was doing recently and helped me out with some issues I was having with an image for some graphics, and he rocks at that kind of thing. So thank you, Damon. I think that's it. Make sure you're subscribed to the show and share us with a friend. What helps the show the most, really, is when someone subscribes in iTunes or the iOS podcast app. So on iPads or iPhones, since iTunes is by far still the most popular place to find podcasts. The more people subscribe, the higher we get ranked, and then we get more attention. I'm a middle school teacher. I know how this attention stuff works. All right, I think we're done here. Peace out, everybody. For
For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. Just click on the Big Seance Podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, and iHeartRadio. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to bigseance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.